Greetings ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's Reddit series video from the subreddit HFY, called Contact Procedures Volume 4 Chapter 5, written by MeatFcker. The link to the original will be down below, and as always, I hope that you enjoy. The Compact had spent an enormous amount of resources trying to limit the Terran military presence on board the Lotus station. Well, they had little control over the official Terran delegations. They had thoroughly screened every other visitor for active military service and disqualified anyone they thought threatening. By the time they started handing out visitation passes, the galactic bureaucrats had convinced themselves that they had only artists, craftsmen, and merchants aboard, holding the more dangerous human soldier caste at bay. They couldn't have been more wrong. The humans had prepared for the Great Survival for 90 years. Human civilization was a term relegated to old jokes in history books. Every human trained to fight. Schools taught fieldcraft and small group tactics alongside mathematics and biology. And every adult served a 4-year term in one of the uniformed services. Nobody was forced to fight. The million-strong crew of the TASS Hephaestus, humanity's largest shipyard, was made up solely of Navy personnel. But every man and woman in Seoul had prepared for the worst since grade school. The sheer number of troops the Terran armed forces had on active duty and in reserve was staggering. This meant that the Admiralty's biggest problem for finding operatives to place on board the Lotus station hadn't been a lack of volunteers, it had been a lack of manpower to sort through the torrent of applications. Every single one of the harmless and influential tourists the Compact cleared board the Lotus station thus had at least a decade of military service. Chief Warrant Officer John Calloway was one of those tourists. The Compact thought that he was an extended trip seeking fresh inspiration for his award-winning poetry. They didn't even suspect that the unassuming writer led the Lotus Vanguard's 9th Squad. He was sipping at his bland, simulated coffee when the war broke out. The human didn't so much as blink when a small computer and his output tied directly into his ocular nerve fed 2 words into his vision: B3 Alpha. Plan Alpha, thought the poet. Glad we don't need to blow this rat trap up after all. He finished his coffee and stared down at his mostly empty notepad while, somewhere on the ship, his squad started moving. The comm network was all but undetectable, masking itself in the background hum of vibration of the station. But the channel remained silent. Radio discipline was deeply ingrained trait into mobilized human race. Calloway waited for 7 painful minutes. Then he rose and strode towards the restricted bulkhead, guarded by a surly-looking Weaker. The 3-legged alien twisted its mouth into a grotesque image of a smile and let the poet past. The poet had bribed the guard months ago, claiming that the noise of the rumble of the station's maintenance passageways helped him concentrate. The Weaker, doubtless under the orders to accommodate the human artist, had gleefully taken the money. That had dealt with the 9th Squad's first obstacle. The next came shortly after, a security bulkhead with a thick door sealed off most of the critical areas of the station: life support, defense systems, security offices, and any plants. Instead of live watcher, a suite of biometric tests stood over guard with these passageways. It hissed open as Calloway approached, the many alarms silent. A human tech had walked him through the complicated bypass the first time he talked his way past the guard. The cameras covering the hallway next were trickier, with no way to access the closed camera network. 9th Squad had been forced to come up with a more creative solution. The poet blinked 3 times in rapid succession, transmitting a single click over the squad's comm network. A few minutes later he received 2 clicks in reply. Naomi's diversion had started. She'd spent the better part of the last month assembling psych profiles on all the high-profile Nictra who frequented the station level 9. She'd pared our list down to 20 most aggressive individuals, tagging each with a small, nearly undetectable tracking beacon. Then she sluiced 8 of the 9 Squad's 14 members on them with orders to make their lives miserable. It had worked wonderfully. Calloway smiled as he thought of Sergeant Naomi, a tiny singer from some avant-garde post-futuristic rock group, picking a fight with a 7-foot-tall werewolf. It was the weakest link in her plan. The Nectra were professionals, but the humans hoped that the guards wouldn't be paying too much attention to the cameras watching the final approach. Why watch the doorstep when there were humans picking fights at your level? The poet sprinted the 200-meter corridor, covering the distance in 22 seconds, and paused outside the door to listen to any sign of the guards that had spotted his approach. There was none. Allowing himself a brief grin, Calloway drew the 3 carbon-bladed knives. 2 were small and delicately balanced, while the third blade was as long as his forearm. Then he unlocked the door with a stolen keycard and stormed. His HUD sprang into life as he cleared the room, the supervisor's vital points highlighted as he sprang desperately towards the alarm switch, went down where one of Calloway's smaller knives slipped through the weak point in his neck. Another Nectra took a knife to the throat half a second later, his gun barely halfway out of its holster. The remaining 2 guards had only begun to turn from the spectacle on their screens when the poet reached them. His long blade flashed out once, then twice, and both toppled over. Calloway smiled as he broke radio silence. "This is Calloway of 9 Squad, we're in." The Marines aboard the TAS Casper let out a cheer when Calloway's words rang out over the stealth ship's loudspeakers. They'd been living in a cramped zero-G troop ship for the past month. Tensions were starting to run high. The flight crew could hardly notice. They were busy guiding the stealthy Wraith-class corvette into position. Even the vaunted human stealth technology couldn't hide the telltale space-time ripples caused by matter-annihilating plants, grav drives, and inertial dampeners needed to take advantage of the modern starship's Delta V. The Wraith was thus designed to surprise rather than to hide, lurking at a distance before powering up its colossal drive core. A single squadron of small corvettes had been smuggled through the gate and parked outside the Lotus Station sensor envelope, and they'd powered down all galactic tech, relying instead on human fusion plants, and waited. 13 minutes ago, the Compact had declared war by sending a flotilla of battleships through the gate. They'd brought their anti-plants online, and all the galactic warships had promptly exploded. The Terran snoop ship, disguised as one of the hundreds of Sol-based merchantmen, was now traveling the stars, had tagged them shortly after they arrived for exercises, and yet another disguised merchant vessel had deposited a couple of dozen EVA troops on a small nuclear mines onto their ships. But the intent was clear enough. War had come. Calloway's transmission meant that they got to join in. None of the Marines on board the Casper bothered to strap themselves down. If the inertial compensators failed, they'd be liquefied with or without the crash couch. The corvette shot forward, accelerating to a significant fraction of the speed of light before deaccelerating to rest relative to Lotus Station. They covered the vast distance to the station in 3 minutes. The petabyte of junk data fed into the galactic defense computers let the Wraith squadron approach untouched. Major Stephen Geary frowned down at his tactical display on the Casper's bridge as they coasted to a halt. "Where'd the Heedless go?" "Engine trouble, sir. They let us know that they wouldn't be joining us right before we went relativistic." "Wonderful. Shorthanded before we begin. Snap up any of the floaters already on board the station and try to arrange a weapons drop. We'll need their help." "Yes, sir." Geary's aide smiled as he skimmed over the list of unclaimed military assets aboard the Lotus Station. Some of the available soldiers were pretty damn recognizable. Meanwhile, 300 Terran Marines spilled out of the corvettes and into the station. Galactic compact defenses meant to prevent exactly this kind of offensive had already been disabled by the human vanguard. The humans slipped through unscathed. Lotus Station wasn't empty, though its garrison of 11,000 troops was caught out of position and still unaware of the Marines. They wouldn't go quietly. The real fight had yet to come. End of chapter. Chapter 6. Jenkins and Slater stared at the new weapons and armor, speechless. Tweety had already been running the final checks on his suit. Slater spoke up. "Think the brass have figured out that I'm not a combat trooper yet?" Tweety didn't even glance up. "Dunno, reminded them lately." "Hell no, your toys are way better than ours." "Stop talking, you two," said Jenkins, ruining the moment. After dropping Mottled off at the Tad's better than you, the 3 soldiers had been temporarily reassigned to Major Geary's boarding company. An awe-struck ensign had guided them to the nearly established advanced base, shown them the armory, and hurriedly excused himself. The 2 humans hadn't moved since the transport sleds had hissed open. Human engineers were integrating new galactic technologies into old designs faster than the Navy could roll out the updates. The Terrans, fully aware that they could never keep every soldier armed with the latest and greatest, had resorted to tricking out new designs and models whenever they could. The Taz Casper was brought only the latest equipment, fresh from the R&D. By comparison, Jenkins' official powered armor was close to 3 years old, and Slater's ERT rig hadn't even seen an upgrade in 5. The Mark 11's BCPs was the latest model, created thanks to the recent breakthroughs in human miniaturization efforts that had allowed the designers to triple the onboard fusion reactor output. R&D was just justifiably proud of this iteration. None of the additional power could be fed into the suit's defensive screens. Those had already plateaued, and would remain the same barring a breakthrough in grav manipulation tech. The shoulder-mounted weapons had remained untouched too. On human suits, the left pauldron mounted a micro-bomb launcher, while the right pauldron could mount either a heavy weapon or a specialist kit. On Neji suits, the mount was removed in favor of a second micro-bomb launcher. Doctrine had the small avians move too fast to aim on one of the heavier cannons, and the extra weight would just slow them down. The engineers had instead used an increased energy budget to create the first ever infantry cloaking module. The perfection-obsessed Compact had never bothered with the technology, painfully aware that a matter of annihilation reactor capable of generating a continual cloak would shine like a beacon on any decent grav wave detector. Human combat armor didn't use any plants though. The Mark 11's miniaturized fusion reactors could generate a continuous but weak cloaking field, bending light around its wearer just enough to muddy their outline and confuse hostile soldiers. The trickle-fed capacitor would also be used to bring the field up to its full strength for 2 to 3 minutes at a time, rendering the slow-moving BCP completely invisible in just about every vision-capable EM wavelength. It lent the phrase, "they'll never see us coming," to a whole new meaning. Jenkins' moment was broken by the Major's entrance. "Stop drooling, boys. I need you in the field." All three of them turned to the Terran commander. He began a short briefing. The newly formed scrap squad is going to be picking up the slack left by the headless core blowout. Their squad was tasked with reinforcing the Chief Warrant Officer Calloway. His group is holding Station Level 9 security office with holdouts and scavenging guns, so try to get there quickly. That security office is our only link to the Lotus's hardened network. We lose them and the Galactics get their sensors and cameras back. Might even let them realize that they've got us outnumbered too. You'll have a handful of volunteers from the men that we brought to hold the position, but I can't give you all of them. 11 men and a grav sled stuffed full of armor is all you get, and you've got to push through 4 enemy-hulled levels. Your HUDs should already be loaded with the route. Good luck out there, Captain Goldcrest Soaring Wings. You have the command of the scrap squad. The Major turned to go, and then paused. "Oh, and Jenkins." "Yes, sir. Don't touch anything that might be a transmitter." Slater was in heaven. The massive ERT shoulder-mounted pulsar cannon tore through the Nectar barricades, its torrent of fire shredding alien to cover alike. The wolfish defenders didn't stand a chance. They haven't learned a thing since the ram, Tweety thought. We figured out how to beat these tactics weeks ago. The squad's 2 Nechi dropped down a more heavily entrenched Nectra, micro-bombing launchers spitting out a steady stream of explosive pellets as they glided past the cover. Cloaking systems and suppressive fire had completely masked the avian's approach. "Jenkins, take your fire team forward and secure the access way," said Tweety. "Ramirez, watch our backs. We're not losing that sled while it's just 2 floors away. Hold it and streak. Catch your breath and then fall in with Jenkins." It really was a shame that the Nechi lacked the human's endurance and accuracy. Tweety always had to fight off a vague sense of intrusion whenever the firefight broke out. Jenkins signaled that the path forward was clear and Scrap Squad could move out. A Weaker poked his head out from where he'd been hiding and saw the Terran Marines, and scampered off in fright. Scrap Squad was good enough to let Tweety split his attention between their progress and the efforts of the other human boarders. He altered their course 4 times, maneuvering Scrap Squad to provide cover for neighboring advancing or outflanked pockets of resistance. The Terrans took full advantage of the newly acquired cloaking technology to surprise and terrify the waiting defenders. Soon, even the famed Nectar discipline crumbled, fighting soldiers throwing down their weapons and fleeing before the ghost-like Terrans. Scrap Squad took their first casualty in Station Level 7. They just took out another barricade and began to move forward when a Nictra, hidden beneath the corpse of two of his fellows, leapt at the squad's medic with a vicious-looking knife that slipped through one of the joints and caught Corporal Mayers in the armpit. As the crazed lupine pulled the knife for another slash, Slater caught the attacker with a punch and sent it flying into the bulkhead. The rest of the squad tore it a wolf apart with pulsar rifle fire. Jenkins frantically stripped the armor plates around the stab wound, but he couldn't stop the internal bleeding. Myers died a few minutes later. Slater took it worst. Two Marines had physically restrained ERT from charging forward with his own to seek revenge. "Now isn't the time, buddy," said Jenkins. "Crap happens, Marines die. Best thing you can do for Myers is to keep your head in and stick to the mission." Slater only grunted, but he stopped struggling. A subdued Scrap Squad resumed their advance towards Calloway's troops. "Last rifles dry," sub-vocalized Naomi. "Anyone got a spare?" The surviving members of the 9th Squad transmitted back to the chorus of no's. Only a few of them had automatic weapons left. Most were down to the slow-firing holdout pistols. They'd fallen back down the fortified hallway and half an hour ago, driven back by their dwindling ammo and the Nictra push. There was also a lot of attackers. The Compact really didn't want the humans sitting in one of their command and control centers. Now they fired the occasional bursts of fire out through the door and prayed that the lupines gathered outside didn't charge. Only 11 humans were left, nowhere near enough to keep them from being overrun. Max, the hideously wealthy businessman back on Mars, poked a small reflective mirror around the door's corner. He cursed out loud as pulsar darts tore through to shreds. "Bastards are moving up nice and slow-like. They'll be close enough to get a good look at us in a few minutes." Calloway grunted, his eyes focused on some unseen diagram generated by his implant. He'd spent most of the firefight vainly trying to find some clever solution to the current predicament. Naomi sighed as she checked the charge on her small pistol. More than 100 shots were left, but the little piece of crap took a solid 20 seconds to cycle. It wouldn't be much use if the Nictra stormed through the door. 9th Squad leader suddenly broke out laughing, and every human in the room, save Max, who was watching the door, turned to stare at the normally grim-faced warrant officer. "Help's finally arrived. It's a shame they shut out our cameras because this is going to be one hell of a show." Max peeked around the corner and then darted through the door. "It's clear," he sent over the comm. "Werewolves are a little bit distracted right now." Naomi slipped through the door next, taking cover behind the many waist-high barricades near the door. The orderly Nictra pushed dissolved into chaos. Small visual distortions were the only sign of Scrap Squad's 3 Nechi as they darted behind the enemy lines, slaughtering unaware Compact troops with microbombs and pulsar fire. Behind them blurred human figures dashing between cover, firing with both shoulder-mounted weapons and rifles. Even Naomi, fully aware of the capabilities of the latest Terran armor, had trouble keeping track of the Terran assault as they slaughtered the surprise Nectra. 200 Compact soldiers were dead in 2 minutes. As the grav sled slid around the corner and the Terrans started to drop their cloaks, Naomi turned to Calloway. "Still worried about holding the choke bone, Chief?" "Not at all, Sergeant. Not at all." End of chapter. I hope that you enjoyed. If you'd like to support the channel or the author, all the stuff is down below. And as always, I hope that you guys have a good one, and I'll see you in the next story. Cheers. P.S. With all the changes in YouTube recently, it has become more a case of when my account will get banned rather than if my account will be banned, the same as everyone else. If you look down below, there is a link to my Soundcloud account where everything gets backed up. I recommend that you follow that account just in case something happens to this account. Other than that, everything will still continue as normal. Thanks. Cheers.